This podcast is brought to you by New Life Ministries.
Welcome to the Every Man's Battle podcast. I'm your host, JJ West. On this podcast, you will hear honest conversation and encouragement for living a life of sexual integrity. Let's get to today's episode. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Every Man's Battle podcast. Thanks for listening. We're so glad that you're tuning in today. We are starting a two-part series on neurochemistry, neurobiology of the brain when we are engaged sexually, when we're aroused, as well as addiction. What does that look like? So today we'll begin that conversation. We'll continue it into next week's episode as well. Before we dive in, I want to make sure that everybody who's listening knows about the discount that you receive for attending the Every Man's Battle Intensive. When you register, if you put in the EMBPOD or EMBPOD in the coupon code, you get $100 off your registration fee. We want to make sure that you're aware of that, simply because what we're hearing from the powers that be at New Life is that not enough guys are taking advantage of that code, even though guys are coming to the workshop because they've heard about it through the podcast. They're not using that discount code. And so we want to make sure that you're getting every penny that you should get from listening to the podcast. So please make sure that you're doing that. But let's jump into today's topic. By the way, my name is JJ West, and I get to serve as the host of the podcast. I also get to serve as a marriage and family therapist in the Central Florida area, working with individuals and couples dealing with sexual integrity issues. And I get to serve as the presenter at the Every Man's Battle Intensive. It's my great honor to do those things. And I'm always honored to be joined by Doug Barnes. Hey, Doug, happy podcast day.
Happy podcast day, JJ. We have a tendency to look forward to these days, right? Because these are really cool. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Texas, and I've been working similarly with couples struggling with sexual integrity. And I've been working with the Every Man's Battle Intensive since really about early 2006. And so it's always great to be here and to be with you and to really focus in on some healing work that we need to do and recovery work that we need to do. So let's go. Let's dive in.
Absolutely. Well, as I said in the intro, today we are going to be talking about what happens neurobiologically, neurochemically in our brain when we are engaged with sexual stimuli. It's important that we look at that and that we also look at the impact of that response on addiction. How does it go from behavior to addiction? So we want to cover all of that. I'm really excited about this topic because the truth is, most of you already know this, I'm just a great big nerd. And so to nerd out on brain chemistry, neural pathways, neuroplasticity, like I love digging into this. I love learning more and more about this. But I know that I have to fight against a tendency to get all wrapped up in the information because it's so interesting. So it's so cool to learn this stuff and fail to move into application. So I want to make sure that I don't fail to do that today. So hopefully, Doug, you'll help me with that by holding my feet to the fire to say, okay, well, that's interesting information, JJ, but how do we now apply that? What does that look like in the recovering addict's life? How does he take that information and make it useful?
Right. That's a fantastic point. I think we also need to avoid shifting blame to, well, it's from our bad behavior to our choices to neuroscience. And so we have to be honest with ourselves that I can't just say, well, my broken brain made me do it. I don't know about your practice, but I know. And so I hear this a lot, especially from other sources like wives and other groups, where they'll say, I don't want to hear that excuse that it's your brain. You chose. Yeah. Well, yes. But what we're doing today is we're unpacking a little bit behind some of those choices that we have a tendency to make from the way God designed us. Right?
Yes.
So
some of the drivers.
Are there any dangers? Oh, yes. So are there any dangers we need to be aware of with this kind of discussion? I mean, it seems like it could be dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, I think those two are important. I think maybe a third that we haven't talked about yet would be to think too little, to dismiss and say, well, it has nothing to do, who cares what's going on in my brain? This is only my choices, my bad choices, my bad behavior. So let me just focus on behavior change. Let me just focus on the do's and the don'ts, and not take seriously what has happened in my brain and what continues to happen in my brain, and the importance of how my brain changes when I start to make better choices. So I think it's important to not overemphasize what's happening, but it's also important not to underemphasize what's happening neurochemically.
So it sounds like there's a fine line there somewhere that we need to learn to navigate.
Yes. Yeah. And hopefully today's discussion helps us a little bit to learn to navigate that, and to maybe avoid those, it's like the old dirt road that I grew up on, right? Where, it's washed out on the two sides from all the rain, and you don't want to overcorrect if you're heading to this ditch. You don't want to overcorrect and end up in the other ditch. So we want to stay in the middle between. We want to have a healthy appreciation for what's happening neurochemically, but we don't want to pin all the blame, all of the responsibility on neurochemistry. We want to use that to help inform us to make better choices and have more healthy behavior.
Right. So we talk about this at the MBA Intensive, but why talk about it here too?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, because we do. I mean, we spend a whole session at the intensive talking about this, but I think it's important to recognize that it's just one session in an entire weekend filled with information. There's a lot of information to cover. We can't actually begin to cover the depth of what's happening neurochemically in that, 75-minute session on Saturday morning.
Right.
We can't really begin to cover everything that we need to cover. So there's a lot more to share. So I think that's part of it. There's a lot of information. I think secondly, we're forgetful. I'm forgetful. I shouldn't say we. I'll just own it. I'm forgetful. And so I can hear something and go, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's helpful. But then a week later, a month later, a year later, I've really forgotten about that. And I need the reminders. I need to. And so like even preparing for these episodes was really helpful for me, because it was a reminder of, oh yeah, that's what's going on. Oh yeah, that's the driver. Oh yeah, that's why it feels so significant or so important or so powerful when it's happening. So I think it's good that we have the reminders, because I'm forgetful. And then I think maybe finally, it might be to offer some corrections. There may be times where I have miscommunicated, not intentionally, but miscommunicated some things at the intensive. And hopefully this would give us an opportunity to make some corrections, or at least clarify some things. So that's what I hope today is about, and what next week's episode is about.
Yeah. And we historically, we are really on the leading edge of, in terms of history, we're on the leading edge in terms of finding out, going deeper about how the brain really works, the neural pathways and all the synapses and all the chemicals and how they interact, especially when we are in our addictive behaviors, when our compulsions and behaviors are being acted out. So to me, this is really an exciting time. I mean, 100 years from now, people are going to look back and go, wow, that's so elementary compared to what they're going to know, right? Compared to what they're going to know then. So this is really exciting. So I think there's some groundbreaking.
It's kind of
material.
Funny, because we're right now what our data tells us is the parts of the brain that light up when we're doing certain things or thinking about certain things. Like, that's the extent of our knowledge, but even that is huge. Like, that's really helpful information. But as you said, years from now, decades from now, man, this is going to be elementary stuff. But for us right now, it's PhD. We're in the deep end. Yeah.
Right. So a lot of our stuff, information-wise, that we talk about at EMB comes from a book by Dr. William Struthers, Wired for Intimacy, with
Correct.
the subtitle "How Pornography Hijacks the Male Brain."
Yes.
So what do you say to guys who's acting out maybe different? It may not be primarily porn. It might be something of another type of behavior to receive some of the same results. What would you say to them? Some of the sexual activity. What would you say to them? And is what we're going to talk about here going to be good for them?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I do think a lot of times guys will say, "Oh, well, because that's that subtitle, right? That how pornography hijacks the
Yeah,
membrane. Well, that's not my
right,
thing, so I can just
right.
discount this. I don't need to listen to
I
this
hear that a
episode.
lot.
I don't
Hmm.
really need this information. This isn't helpful for me." Listen, all of our sexual acting out behavior operates neurochemically the same in our brain. So whether it's pornography, it's fantasy, it's strip clubs, massage parlors, cross dressing, hooking up with multiple affair partners, prostitutes, whatever, like all that stuff has the same impact neurochemically in our brain. And we're oftentimes, from a psychological and emotional standpoint, we're oftentimes trying to self-medicate the same stuff, whether it's pornography or it's strip clubs or it's massage parlors or it's affair partners or whatever, right? So the what's happening in our brain, what you're going to learn is happening in your brain, is going to be the same no matter what your acting out behavior is. And actually, there's actually quite a few crossovers to what happens in our brain neurochemically if we're dealing with drug addiction, or we're dealing with food addiction, or we're dealing with some other behavioral addiction like gambling or workaholism or whatever. A lot of similarities there as well.
So it's not just about porn use. It transfers to other quote addictions that we possibly could be engaging in.
Several of the things that we talk about today will. Now, there's some stuff that's specific to sexual addiction or sexual acting out that we'll talk about today that wouldn't necessarily translate to some of those other behaviors, especially when we're talking about the visual aspect of it. Obviously,
Right.
that's not going to be the same for someone who's shooting heroin or whatever. They're not going to have that same impact.
Right.
New Life Ministries saved my completely broken marriage.
No matter how much hurt you've had to face, no marriage is beyond hope. At New Life Ministries Intimacy and Marriage Weekend, licensed counselors will help you rebuild communication skills and renew your commitment to each other. You don't have to settle for a miserable marriage or even one that's just okay. It's possible to experience a new level of intimacy and have a great marriage. To register or to find out more, call 1-800-NEW-LIFE or online at newlife.com.
So let's move on. So why is porn?
Okay.
I mean, I hear this all the time. Why is porn, specifically internet pornography, so often, as we use a pop term, a gateway to other forms of acting out, other behaviors? Why is that?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that like a gateway?
Yeah. Well, so in Dr. Struthers' book, as well as some other places, they talk about the 3 A's of internet pornography. There's accessibility, affordability, and anonymity. Okay, so accessibility. It's so much easier to access pornography through the internet than any other, place or any other time in our lives. When I was growing up, I had a lot of pornography. I had access to a lot of pornography because of my dad's collection. But for most people, if they're wanting to view pornography, they have to go to the newsstand or the bookstore and buy the magazine. They have to go to the video store and rent the video. They have to have some sort of human interaction that is maybe a roadblock. There's a cost involved, certainly. Whereas internet pornography, man, it's available. It's easy to get. Within milliseconds, right? You can click on, you can get online and have just hundreds and hundreds and thousands and hundreds of thousands of images and videos at your disposal. And most of it is free. I mean, yes, there's stuff that you can pay for, but there's a lot out there that is free, so it's affordable. Or even if it isn't free, it's low cost. And then finally, the anonymity, like I talked about, you used to have to go to the bookstore or to the video store or whatever, some sort of human interaction. Whereas with internet porn, man, nobody knows that I'm doing this. I'm hidden. My behavior is easily hidden from the world, right?
Right. Yeah, I used to cringe way back in the early days, the VHS days. You know, I would always have to psych myself out, sitting in the car, out in the parking lot, just to take a deep breath, just to go in. Who is going to be in there? What is that person behind the counter thinking of me when I go past all the Disney movies and all the the short stories, and I'm going to the section adults only. You know, I've always wondered that. Just the shame in that. I mean, I'd walk out of there and go, I mean, I'd be sweating, just like, gosh, what is going on with that? Right? Yeah. I mean, I
had a similar reaction when I would just go buy like the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. At the grocery store, it was like, oh gosh, is anyone going to see this? And like, what does the cashier think? And like, this wasn't even like many would not even call that pornography. Although I would say that there's certainly elements of softcore porn there. But that similar thing, right? And so internet pornography, my gosh, it gives you, it takes all of that away and gives you the sense of anonymity. It's not true anonymity, but it gives you the sense of anonymity and certainly the accessibility, because man, I can get it immediately. I don't have to wait.
Right. Yeah. Right. Certainly not victimless for sure.
Yeah. And then, so why it ends up being this gateway to more things, to acting out more. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk about tolerance later. But part of why it ends up being this gateway is that it actually corrupts our ability to be intimate when we're viewing pornography. Mm-hmm. It causes us to redefine what intimacy is in our brain into a not biblical definition of intimacy. And it makes a promise of intimacy, but it never delivers a real connection between two human beings, because you can't add that with a two-dimensional image, whether that's on a screen or in a magazine or whatever. Even if it's a moving image, it's still not an interaction with another individual. And so we were designed for that, right? We were designed to experience intimacy as a heart-to-heart connection with another person. And so the pornography never delivers on that promise. And so we keep looking for, well, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? Maybe that will deliver. Maybe that will deliver, right? And so we continue to look for something better, something bigger, something newer, something that's going to scratch that itch, because the pornography, even though it promises it's going to do that, it doesn't, right?
Yeah, interesting you say that. There's a tendency to say, well, I'll look at Sears catalog, but I won't look at the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition. Oh, darn, I looked at the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition. Now I know I'm not going to look at soft core.
Victoria's Secret. Oh, I'm not going to go to.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And so that line
keeps
getting pushed out there for some. Now, not everybody does, but for some, for sure. What strikes me is when we're talking about someone who's 17 or 13 or 8, they're not thinking, for the most part, I'm making conjecture here, but for the most part, they're not thinking about intimacy. Even though that's God's design, I get it. Correct. I get it. But they're not thinking about intimacy. They're looking at just the physical ramifications, the arousal, the eye candy, right? So it's the two-dimensional visual. Yes. Mm-hmm. And so at some point in time, as we get older and start looking for future mates and getting married, now we're taking this corrupted view of sex, and now we're supposed to somehow interpret that as intimacy.
Right.
And that to me, as I think through that, I'm going, that was never on my radar.
Right. Right. No, when I first started looking at pornography, oh my gosh, no, I wasn't thinking about, oh, this is a form of intimacy that my heart is craving, and it's broken,
Right.
but it'll do for now, right? Like, no, it was just, this is exciting, this is amazing. Oh my gosh, I've never seen this before, and this feels so good. And then, somewhere along the way, you discover masturbation, and you combine masturbation and pornography, and oh my gosh, this is terrific. This is, but we're not thinking about the intimacy aspect of it then. But yet, our hearts, even at 8 and 10 and 12, our hearts are still longing for
100%.
Still
100%.
longing for that intimacy, and it's getting a taste of it. It's getting a sense of it, broken, incomplete, but getting a sense of it through that interaction, right?
Right.
I think about in my own story. I so much wanted to be the guy that could go up and talk to girls and they would just, oh yes, you're great, right? I wanted to be. I never was. I know, shocking. I never was, but I wanted to be.
Was I.
And in the fantasy of pornography, I got to pretend that was true. I got to play that role, right? It was so I got to experience some of what I thought everybody else was getting that was restricted from me, right? Right.
And you talked about the excitement, and so we attach that to when we get married. They'll say, okay, so sexual encounters with our spouses are supposed to be exciting and new, and they get better and better and better. And so we take that idea, that ideal that we've created, sometimes for double decade years, into a marriage, and we wonder why we have issues, right? I mean, how could we possibly think it would be the same? But we do.
Right.
But we do.
Right. Yeah. And we fail to realize that, this is an airbrushed, manipulated image, whether it's print or video or whatever, but it's manipulated, and it's not reality. And because I am, nothing's required of me, right? The image on the screen is never asking me, oh, did you brush your teeth? Never asking me, did you remember to pay that bill or contact the attorney or whatever, is never angry with me because I made some stupid comment at dinner, right? Like, none of that's happening in the fantasy of pornography. And so, so I don't have to do real intimacy. It's a false intimacy. But then when I get into real relationship with another real person, now it's like, well, this isn't nearly as much fun. This requires something of me, and I gosh darn it, I'm tired. I want it to be all about me.
You mentioned early in the intro that we would be talking not only about neuroscience, but involved in that arousal and sex, but we'd also be talking about addiction. So talk for a second about pornography, and is sex addiction a real thing? I get that question a lot in my office, especially from the spouses. Is this real? Is this legit? So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, and it's depending on who's asking the question. Most of the time, I think it's a fair question. Most of the time, I think it's a genuine question. And to that question, I say, yes, it is a real thing, even though, you know this as well, right? There's no listing in the DSM-5. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, for those of you who are not in the field. So it's the manual we use to code the diagnoses that we're working with. And there is no diagnosis for sexual addiction. It doesn't exist currently in the DSM. But what we do have is clear clinical evidence of the same kinds of behaviors and consequences from sexual acting out, like viewing pornography, masturbation, strip clubs, massage parlors, affair partners, you name it. We see the same. We see the same behaviors and consequences in sexual acting out as we do in other addictions that are listed in the DSM. So, for instance, we see alcohol abuse and dependence. We see drug abuse and dependence. We see gambling abuse and dependence. We see food addictions, right? All of those things are in the DSM. Sex addiction currently is not, but it operates the same way. It looks the same. And so, and I understand, especially if a wife is asking that question, part of that question is, are we just making an excuse for the behavior?
Right.
And I would say, no, no, we're not. We're not making an excuse. We're explaining, not excusing. We're describing. It's a healthy way to describe what's happening, but it doesn't remove the responsibility of the person who is addicted, who has an addictive relationship with sex. Okay. It doesn't excuse their choices. It doesn't excuse their behavior. They still are responsible for all the choices that they're making, but it does help. It does help explain why I have continued to make bad choices, make unhealthy choices in my sexual behavior, even though I've had some pretty significant consequences, or I knew that there would be really significant consequences if I continued on that path, and I stayed on the path anyway. Well, the reason we do that is addiction. And, I've used my definition of addiction many times, but, it's anytime I use a mood altering substance or behavior as a way to escaping negative circumstances, situations, feeling overwhelmed, whatever.
Right.
I use my sexual acting out, that mood altering experience of sexually acting out, as a way to escape from those things, even though doing so has created some pretty significant negative consequences, either in my own life or in the lives of those around me. I keep going back to it. That's addiction. And I keep going back to it because I keep trying to chase that first time high, and I never get there because we build up a tolerance, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Well, because we're running short on time, I think what we'll do is we'll carry this conversation over to next week's episode, which is going to be a continuation, part 2, on the topic of neurobiology and brain chemistry as it relates to our sexual behavior and addiction. We're going to continue the conversation. Man, this has been a good start. But like we said at the beginning, we're scratching the surface here because there's so much to cover. There's so many different perspectives that people have, very valid questions that people have about addiction, about sexual addiction. And so we want to try and do it as much justice as possible. So thanks for listening today. I want to ask a favor. I want to ask 2 things. One, as I mentioned at the beginning, listen, if you have never been to the Everyman's Battle Intensive, I would love for you to go. We know what God does there. We want you to have that experience. We definitely don't want cost to be the issue. So use the code EMBPOD, EMBPOD to get the $100 off the registration fee. But if money's still an issue, call 1-800-NEW-LIFE and talk to them about a scholarship, because we don't want anyone to be turned away because of cost. That's request number 1. Request number 2 is this. Would you please consider liking and sharing this podcast? The reason why, it's a simple thing to do, right? To like and subscribe and share. When you do that, it actually allows more people to hear the content. And we know that there's a much wider audience that has a need for this than is currently taking advantage of it. And so would you do that? Would you just take the moment to like and subscribe and then share the podcast with someone that you know that you think might be interested? Maybe they're a nerd like me. They love brain chemistry. They'd want to hear it from that perspective. Or maybe it's someone in your circle that you know is struggling, or you suspect might be struggling with their own sexual acting out. And so would you be willing to share with them so they can be along for the journey? Doug, thanks for being along for the journey with me today. I really appreciate it. And
thanks, JJ.
It's been such a good conversation. Let's continue on next week, right?
Yes. A lot of work to go. More to do.
A lot to do. So until then, guys, let's keep walking in integrity.
Thanks for listening. This podcast is just one of the many ways we can encourage and help you. If you're looking for more help, visit us at newlife.com or call 1-800-NEW-LIFE. Please remember to review, like, and share the podcast as it helps others find us. If you have a comment about this podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line at embpodcast@newlife.com. See you next week.